Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. So, you know how sometimes you'll be reading a book and you will be fully aware of how brilliant it is. You will know that it is wonderfully well written, the characters are super interesting, the plot is fascinating, and yet, through it all, you just aren't having fun. That's exactly how I felt reading this book. So The Obelisk Gate is book 2 of the Broken Earth trilogy, and like usual with my reviews of sequels, be prepared, there will be spoilers for book 1 in this review. So if you have not read the 5th season, I do suggest you stop watching this review now, maybe go read the book, come back, watch this review afterwards. But I will try my best to keep most spoilers about this book out of the review. So we begin this book well into a season, and seasons in this series are long periods of apocalyptic cataclysm that just sort of happens sometimes in this world. This season in particular is worse than most of them, is going to last a lot longer than most of them, and it was caused by a person, Alabaster. He has ripped open a hole in the world, and Ishan, our main character, has just found Alabaster in Castrema. Alabaster, who she has a long history with and has a lot of emotions about. And this community has drawn her in almost magically and has invited her to stay in slightly more aggressive terms than most invitations happen. And she's not entirely sure about staying here. There's something that feels off to her about the fact that in this community, Roga, the people who manipulate the earth magically, are not just accepted, but they're sort of welcomed. And this is not how they're treated in the rest of the world. So she has wariness about it, but she also knows she cannot keep traveling through what is very swiftly becoming a wasteland in the desperate search of finding her daughter, Jemisin. She has completely lost her trail, she doesn't know where to go next, so for now she's going to have to stay, build a life here, and do what is necessary to survive. At the exact same time, the book is also following Jemisin's story from when her father decides not to kill her for being a Roga and drags her south, clearly searching for something. But is it safety in this time of upheaval? Or is it a cure for the part of his daughter he can't bring himself to love? Okay, so yeah, this book is brilliant. I will not stop stating that. This book is absolutely wonderful. It is so masterfully written. It is powerful. It's chock full of metaphorical world building that will make you see our world in ways you have never imagined before. It's got some impressively nuanced and complex characters who you will root for even while you hate their actions. It even manages to completely rewrite your perception of characters from book 1 in a way that feels natural, and sometimes I felt myself grating against it, being like, I don't want to change my opinion on this character, but the book forced me to, in a way that feels very much like the way life sometimes forces you to change your opinion about people. There's also some absolutely amazing action, written in ways that are creative and novel and interesting. But they're also really easily followed. I do find that sometimes when people get too creative with writing your action, you're like, what is happening? I don't know. No, this book, I got it. I never had problems with the moments where metaphor overwhelmed logic. There's also just a magic system that it's really complex. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of lore and history built into the book, which are things that I love in world building. I want the world to feel like it has had millennia of history, and this one certainly does. The world is complex, it's intricate, it weaves together so many disparate elements that sort of feel like they shouldn't fit, but they fit perfectly. It's got a couple of compelling quests at its heart, driving you into the book, and it's doing some really interesting things structurally. There are so many things about this book I absolutely love and think are brilliant. And I just did not actively enjoy reading it. The first third, I really couldn't put it down. The first third, I was so totally into it. I was ready to keep going. I actually lost this book for a night and was so upset. I was like, oh my god, but I was really into it. And then I refound it and made it to about halfway, and I was like, okay, I'm a little bit glad to be taking excuses and to take a break to read something lighter. In this case, it was a series of unfortunate events. And then we get to the last third of the book, and every page felt like I was struggling to convince myself to pick it up. And not because the writing was hard to understand, or the scenes were just so emotional that I needed a pause to mourn or anything. It was just too heavy for me. The world is in such a shitty place. All the characters have too much trauma, which is saying a lot. Because I love me some traumatized characters. Like, if you give me a character with a huge backlog of shitty things in their past, I'm like, yeah, tell me more. But these characters, somehow it's too much trauma. Everyone is having to make these world-endingly bad choices all the time, where both options are just terrible. Everyone is having to be so cold in order to survive. Everything feels like a trolley problem. Like, is it better to kill the one to save the five, or kill the five? Or just, I don't know, blow up the trolley. And everyone is just full of despair. There's pretty much no joy whatsoever. There's almost no humor. I needed some witty banter to get me to keep going. And I clung so tightly to, like, one-page description of the blossoming relationship between two characters because I was just like, oh my god, something that could provide a reason to want to keep living. How nice for them. And, like, that's fine for a lot of readers. This is just a me preference. This is too much dark for me. And don't get me wrong, there is hope in this book. I still suspect that the series is going to have a melancholy but happy ending once we're done with book 3. And objectively, in trilogies, second books almost always are the low point. The point where the characters see no way out. They have the weight of and scars from their previous battles from book 1 and are fighting new battles and are gearing up to fight the final battle in book 3. So book 2's just get dark. It happens. It's not uncommon for favorite characters to die, for sweet, innocent characters to be faced with so much pain that they just sort of lose track of who they are at their core. Often this is where characters we love end up on opposite sides of the playing field. And even though, yeah, book 2s usually end in some form of victory, it's almost always a sort of hollow feeling victory. It's almost always has that feeling of, we barely survived this battle, how are we going to survive the fight with the big bad at the end? All of this is perfectly normal. But the Broken Earth trilogy starts with some pretty fucking dark and heavy world building to begin with. So once we got to the dark low point in the series, it went from being like the dark of a sky full of stars to being like that exact same sky, but with dark toxic smog slowly swallowing those stars. And like so much of this book is about how generational trauma scars and deforms a person's view of the world. It's about how you end up passing that pain down, even if you are actively trying not to. How you never really forget the horrible things done to you. And even if you change your name, disown your past, try to forget, and build an entirely new life, you are still shaped by that pain, and still likely to pass that pain on to the next generation. And that's great. It's effective. It's heartbreaking. It takes the sort of thing that you know logically and turns it into the sort of thing you feel in the core of your being. You feel that Isun didn't even realize that after all the work she did to prevent her children from experiencing the abusive training of the Fulcrum, she still passed that pain on. And we feel the fact that in trying to protect children, sometimes adults result to violence, and how that ends up with the children turned against themselves, trapped, and turned into monstrous versions of what they could have been. We feel how being constantly in pain can break your empathy, hope, and softness. And that's great. I'm glad the book went there. This book feels like one of those that reshapes how the synapses of your brain works. And I love that, especially when it's shaping them to an important lesson, which I feel like, yes, these are important lessons. I'm sure I will have enjoyed having read this book once I climb out of the funk it has left me in, but I'm just in a bit of a funk from it. I feel a bit like curling up on the couch in the darkness and staring off into space until I feel ready to cry. It was a lot. And yeah, I wasn't in the best of moods to start when I forced myself to pick up the last third of this book, but I was nowhere near this down when I did so. And that's not to say the ending itself is a downer, though I'll get to that a bit. There's a lot of hope with where we leave Jemisin. Not everything is as dark as it looked about 3/4 of the way through. More characters actually survived the ending than I expected them to. There's hope that Jemisin will find Nassin, and hopefully before she is too thoroughly warped by the world she lives in, and Nassin has learned more about her mother in a way that feels like they might actually be able to have an eventually happy reunion, which it really didn't look like they were going to be able to have that when I was about 1/3 of the way through, or 2/3 of the way through the book. And collectively, they have the tools they need to save the world. This is a great place to be going into book 3. We have the hope we need to continue. And then there's one more scene from Nassin, and it's just so hurt people. It's so the world has turned me into a monster. It's so I'm putting all my trust in the wrong person. And it killed whatever feelings of fun I had at the semi-victorious ending that Jemisin had. Like, it hit me so hard that not only am I not immediately going to buy book 3, there's a big part of me that's considering never reading book 3 at all. And like, I cannot help but acknowledge that this is an absolutely brilliant series up to this point. That this is like a series that feels important. It feels like I should want to read it. It feels like the same level of making an impact on the world as like the Lord of the Rings. Like, this should be something I immediately want to pick up the third. And I don't. Like, I am seriously considering just waiting until Netflix finally realizes that they could make a cultural zeitgeist-defining big-budget miniseries from this book, and just watching it when it comes out instead of reading it, because watching things don't affect me as emotionally as reading them do. But, like, I don't know. I know there's a lot more that I wanted to talk about with this book. Structure. 5th season, the previous book, did this really interesting structural thing where we have segments in 1st person, 2nd person, and 3rd person POV. Which, big spoilers for that book here, turn out to be the sections of the same character's life narrated slightly differently. And from different points in her life. She goes by different names in different points. We are basically building the character from her different points of view. And it was such a revelation when I realized what was going on. It was so well done that I didn't have my knee-jerk dislike for 2nd person. And yes, I do tend to have a knee-jerk dislike for 2nd person. Like, I'm not a huge fan of 1st, but I'll get used to it pretty quickly. 3rd person to me is normal. 2nd person almost always feels like someone is just trying to make their book stand out. It almost always feels like someone is going, look, my book is doing something artistic, isn't it cool? But this series uses it right to really force you to empathize with the main character and to make you feel culpable in her choices. And this book, book 2, does something similar but completely different with its structural choices. We again do have sections in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Nassin's sections are the ones in 3rd person, though truthfully, even they are technically in 2nd person. We get enough asides from the narrator saying things like, you don't know this yet, that, yeah, you can tell that it is the same narrator telling you this, but it feels more like a traditional 3rd person because the narrator is not talking directly to the character that is being narrated about, if that makes sense. But the 2nd person is the bulk of the narrative. It is Jemisin's story, and it is, you realize throughout the book, a character telling Jemisin her own story. And then there's the 1st person sections, which are the only sections that are really the narrator speaking about themselves. And what's really cool here is that slowly across the book, it becomes clear that this is a definitive separate narrator, that is someone specifically talking to us, and it's a character in the book. And the slow revelation that that's going on, and then the sudden revelation, the confirmation of who it is, it was beautiful. It felt backed up, it felt logical, it did not feel like a twist, it just felt like a revelation. But it adds a lot of depth and feeling of purpose to the narration, and it even adds this bit of a bias to the narrative that really works for me. There is just the hint of a unreliable narration going on. And there are even moments where the voice itself is used for foreshadowing and for hints that is just beautifully done. And it is so fucking cool. This is what all those gimmicky books are trying to do. But here, it actually works. And like with the first one, every time I picked it up, after having not read for a couple of days, which I did take a lot of breaks from this book, yeah, I will admit, I was thrown and once again had to, like, take time to adjust to the oddities of the POV, but once you do adjust, it's easy reading and it works beautifully well. But beyond that, I don't know. I think this book is 110% worth reading. It's got so much going on. It's doing beautiful things. I cannot stress to you enough how perfect the prose is. It is lyrical, but never at the cost of understandability. It's elegant and sharp. It's decisive and purposeful. It's got such human characters that they feel like people you know. And of course, that's really important when one of your main themes is dehumanization of people who are seen as other. There's just so much good going on with this book. And I just hated the process of reading it. I kept putting it down and not wanting to pick it up. But I will say, this is one that I will 100% say is a me thing. This is just a bit dark for me. So, I will say, if you can handle even slightly dark books, do pick up this series. You will love it. And I'm just off to read something, hopefully, a lot more light. I'm picking up a middle grade book next. It will be okay.